Good evening, good evening, good evening. It is hard to believe that it is November, y'all. And it is just 2 days until this all important election. This is Jon Ossoff in Georgia, joining you from home. I was supposed to be on the debate stage tonight, y'all. We'll get into that in a moment. I hope that this finds you in good health. I hope that you and your families are well. We're going to be taking questions live from across the state of Georgia tonight. This is, I believe, the 33rd town hall meeting, in person or virtual, since the pandemic, that I have held during this campaign. My opponent, Senator David Perdue, and we'll talk about him a little bit more later too, has held 0 public town hall meetings in 6 years as Georgia's United States Senator. Again, this is the 33rd town hall that I've held during this campaign. I have some exciting news. It's gotten a little bit chilly here in Georgia as we get into fall, and we have lit a fire in the fireplace for the first time of the season. So that's feeling good. And I'm just glad that you're joining for this One Georgia town hall. Remember, if you have a question for me, drop it in the comments, drop it in the replies. We will try to take as many questions live from across the state as we can tonight. But let's just speak for a moment about why I'm holding this town hall right now instead of debating. Because for weeks, there has been a debate scheduled between me and Senator David Perdue on WSB television tonight, so that voters, before they go to cast their ballots on Tuesday, can hear from the 2 candidates for U.S. Senate, can hear us ask questions of each other and respond to questions about policy, our records, and our respective visions for representation of this state in the U.S. Senate. We were supposed to be debating right now on television here in Georgia, but we're not debating because, see, we had a debate in Savannah on Wednesday evening, Senator Perdue and I. And at that debate, I asked the senator some tough questions. I asked Senator Perdue why he had voted 4 times to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. I asked the senator why he had insisted to us that COVID-19 was no deadlier than the flu when he knew better. I asked the senator why he had bought stock in a manufacturer of medical equipment the same day the Senate got a classified briefing on COVID-19 back in January. Well, he didn't like getting those questions at our debate in Savannah, and he has bailed out of our scheduled debate tonight in Atlanta at the very last minute. The people deserve the opportunity to see candidates for office debate one another in an open forum. This is a democracy. Democracy only works when the people have the chance to hear directly from candidates who seek to represent them. And an incumbent United States Senator has an obligation to answer tough questions, to defend their record in office, and to come and meet their opponent in open debate. Senator Perdue feels entitled to this Senate seat. Senator Perdue doesn't believe he should have to answer tough questions. That's why he hasn't held a town hall meeting in 6 years. And that's why, like a coward, he decided to pull out of our final debate at the very last minute. Now, he told everybody this was because there was a Trump rally in Rome tonight, but I know for a fact that WSB television offered flexibility on time. I offered flexibility on time. And Senator, I'm still ready to debate you anytime, anywhere between now and the election. You owe the people of this state an explanation of your financial misconduct. You owe the people of this state an explanation of your votes to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. You owe the people of this Georgia an explanation of your catastrophic incompetence during this COVID-19 pandemic. But anyway, y'all, instead of debating Senator Perdue, I want to answer questions directly from you, voters across Georgia. Whether you're for me or against me or still weighing your options, please know that I want to hear from you. I want to answer your questions. I want to win your support. And unlike Senator Perdue, as your senator, I will be accountable and transparent and accessible. I welcome criticism. I welcome scrutiny. I welcome tough questions. And I will always approach questions from the people with an open mind and a willingness to change my mind. So again, this is a live town hall I'm Jon Ossoff, the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate here in Georgia. If you have a question for me, drop it in the replies, drop it in the comments. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And we're going to get started now. We have our first question from Carl in Lawrenceville. And Carl asks, what are my ideas for health care reform and the Affordable Care Act in light of all the attacks on the ACA? And Carl, thank you so much for the question. I was just up in Lawrenceville yesterday campaigning for Carolyn Bourdeaux, who I hope will be the new U.S. representative for the 7th Congressional District. And Carl, your question is so timely because our healthcare is on the ballot in this election. And Senator Perdue and President Trump have made destruction of the Affordable Care Act and repeal of those vital protections for Georgians with pre-existing conditions their top priority for years. I will work to strengthen and improve the ACA, to strengthen protections for pre-existing conditions, and to make health insurance and prescription drugs affordable for every family in the state. And I'll get into in a moment how we can achieve that. But let's just at the outset state the principle. Great health care, affordable insurance, affordable health care, that should be a simple, reassuring reality for every family. That's the bottom line. And it can be. We have the power to make it so. What stands in our way is corruption. The massive political power of insurance and drug companies in Washington. And the power of insurance and drug companies is why politicians like David Perdue vote repeatedly to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions. The power of insurance and drug companies is why politicians like David Perdue vote against cracking down on price gouging by drug companies. Senator Perdue doesn't care about the health of ordinary people and working families in our state. The same reason he doesn't care about coming out and answering questions in a public forum. He's not working on our behalf. He's working on behalf of those powerful industries that buy his time, buy access to him, and pay his campaign war chest to influence how he votes. So, Carl, I will fight to protect coverage for pre-existing conditions. No one should lose their health care just because they get sick. So if you or a family member has had asthma or diabetes, or you've got cancer in remission, or high blood pressure, or someone has survived COVID-19, I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that you still get great health insurance. I will crack down on price gouging by insurance companies and abuses by insurance companies. You know, they make it so difficult to access service, denying claims on an arbitrary grounds, suddenly informing you a doctor you thought was in network isn't actually in network. You get a surprise medical bill. Doesn't have to be that way. I will hold insurance companies accountable. I'll work to expand Medicaid so that every family in the state can afford the care they need, and to support and strengthen our rural hospitals. And I'll fight for a strong public option on the ACA exchange so that everybody has a choice between a nonprofit plan that is universally affordable or private insurance if that's their preference. Thank you so much for the question, Carl. Now we have a live question from Twitter, which is, how would you change voting in the future to help everybody vote? And that comes in on Twitter right now from Funky Sacks. Thank you so much for the question. So what we need in this country is a new Voting Rights Act. Voter suppression should be a crime. The fact that there are still public officials in Georgia and indeed across the country who want to make it harder for eligible voters to participate in our democracy is a disgrace. And what we've seen here in Georgia over the last few weeks has been at the same time tragic and incredibly inspiring, because we have still seen Georgia voters forced to wait in 6, 8, 10-hour lines. And we know for a fact that Black voters are much more likely to be made to wait in those lines here in Georgia. That's why it's called James Crow Esquire. Voter suppression. This is the new literacy test, the new poll tax, policies deliberately implemented to make it more difficult for Black Americans to vote. But what we've also seen in Georgia is that in the face of voter suppression, the people are more determined than ever to defend their voting rights by participating in our democracy. My first ever exposure to public service was working as a very, very young man for Congressman John Lewis, who became my mentor. It was 55 years ago that Congressman Lewis had his skull fractured, marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, to demand voting rights for Black Americans in the South. And the fact that 55 years later, there are still officials working to suppress voters, it is an attack on democracy, and it's why we need a new Voting Rights Act that will defend, guarantee the franchise for every American citizen. So thank you so much for the question. We have another question now from Josh in Johns Creek, who just submitted this on Twitter. Hey, Josh, thank you for the question. What steps specifically will you take to help fight the virus? Great question, Josh, a really important question. And the bottom line is that this is about empowering public health experts, doctors, scientists, epidemiologists, the people who have the expertise and training and experience to fight a deadly pandemic, to lead that fight. The basic problem since day one is that foolish, narcissistic, self-interested politicians have suppressed the expertise of, for example, the epidemiologists and doctors at Georgia's own CDC. And they've politicized the response to this virus, sent mixed messages on public health guidelines, politicized things as simple as wearing masks or social distancing. Even just yesterday, my opponent, David Perdue, out on the stump was mocking social distancing. This is about implementing the advice of the people who know what they're talking about, not just to keep ourselves safe, but to keep each other safe and our communities safe. So step one is to empower doctors and scientists to do their jobs and lead the public health response. They're the ones who know what they're doing. My wife, Alicia, is an OBGYN doctor, as many of you know, here in Georgia. And doctors and nurses like Alicia have been doing their jobs heroically to save lives and keep people healthy, often at great personal risk throughout this pandemic. It's the politicians who have failed us. My opponent told us that COVID-19 was no deadlier than the flu. He said that the risk to our health was low. He said that the impact on our economy would be little. All the while, he was getting private briefings in Washington on the truth. US intelligence analysts and public health specialists were warning the president and Congress about the true scope of the threat. But they lied to us. And nearly 250,000 Americans have lost their lives, and they're still lying to us. I saw last week that the White House had declared victory over COVID-19 and listed ending the pandemic as one of the president's signature achievements. I mean, it's mind-blowing stuff. The level of deception, deliberate deception, when what we need is clarity and honesty. We need clear guidance on how to protect ourselves and our families. We urgently need to rush more economic and financial relief to working people and small businesses. They're not doing any of that. They're trying to distract us from the pandemic, and they're pushing through a Supreme Court nominee. That's their priorities. This is why it's so important to vote on Tuesday, y'all. And let's talk about voting for a second, because in Georgia especially, these races are going to be so, so close. And it is so important that not only we cast our ballots, we get everybody we know out to the polls. This isn't about political party, y'all. It's not about political ideology. It's not about left versus right or red versus blue. This is about competence and integrity versus catastrophic incompetence and total deceit. That's what we've gotten from Donald Trump and David Perdue. They've lied to us systematically about the most significant public health crisis in generations, and they don't deserve to be reelected. And if we don't change leadership in this country, then hundreds of thousands more Americans may needlessly die because we failed to implement a strong public health response informed by medical expertise. So we're going to keep it moving. And the next question is from April, a small business owner, who asks, what I will do to make Georgia's small business owners feel more secure, and what is my plan to keep businesses afloat during this pandemic? It's a great question, April, and thank you for submitting it. And it's the other aspect of this discussion about this crisis. We just talked about how we need to let the public health experts, doctors, scientists, epidemiologists lead in the public health response. But let's now talk about the economic response, because so many Georgians, so many Americans are suffering and struggling right now. I was out at the rally with Senator Harris about 10 days ago, something like that, and it was over near the new huge football stadium, Mercedes-Benz Stadium here in Atlanta. And I met just outside of the event a young lady named Charlene. And as Charlene told me her story, she broke down into tears because Charlene had just started up a car parking service, a car parking business that served people who came to watch games and events at the stadium. And she was just getting off of her feet. She had saved up some money to put in the business. It was going well. Things were looking good. And then this crisis hit. And because obviously sporting events and big live in-person events are not possible in a pandemic, her business has dried up. And she can't get PPP support because they haven't reauthorized the program, the small business lending program, since the summertime. And now Charlene, she explained to me in tears, can't make her house payment, can't make her car payment, is afraid that she may be homeless soon. She can't find any support from the federal government. Now, contrast her experience with, for example, what investment banks on Wall Street are getting right now. When major investment banks face a cash crunch, they don't even have to ask Congress. They go right to the Fed. They've gotten trillions of dollars in cash and loans in the last 6 months. And while the Senate hasn't passed any additional economic relief in months and months, you can rest assured that if Goldman Sachs stock valuation started crashing, David Perdue would be on the first jet back to Washington and they'd pass something instantaneously. But they don't care about ordinary people, y'all. Because think about who's suffering during this crisis. It's not David Perdue's donors. It's folks like Charlene. It's small business owners. It's working parents who are sat around the kitchen table and worried that they're not going to be able to make that house payment and afford health care because one of them's out of work. Millions have filed jobless claims here in Georgia over the last 6 months. And Congress hasn't passed any new economic relief in months and months. The Senate decided that the best use of its time was a Supreme Court confirmation with days until the election. I mean, they're so out of touch. And the truth of the matter is that politicians like David Perdue do not care about ordinary people. They don't care about ordinary people. If they did, they'd be hard at work delivering relief. If David Perdue cared about ordinary people, he'd come out and debate his opponent on the eve of the election instead of hiding away to avoid scrutiny and avoid tough questions. So what we need to do, April, is rush additional relief fast directly to working families and small businesses. Direct relief to workers, to small businesses, to keep them afloat during this pandemic. And then we need a historic infrastructure program to jumpstart this economy, create tens of thousands of jobs, and build a recovery. And that will be priority number one for me. We'll be working on a recovery package, an infrastructure bill, which will include investments in clean energy to get the economy moving again in the new year. So thank you for your question, April. We have another live question. Remember, y'all, you can drop your questions in the replies or the comments. We have another live question on Twitter, which is, what would you do to make sure that students can go back to school in the safest possible manner? Thank you so much for the question. And in conversations that I have with families across Georgia, up there with how are we going to stop the spread of the virus? How are we going to get the cost of healthcare under control? How are we going to get the cost of housing under control? The top question I hear from people is about schools right now, because Washington has left local school districts high and dry. Georgia's school systems were forced to partially reopen in the middle of a pandemic without any meaningful support from Congress. And local school systems don't have the expertise or the resources to meet CDC public health guidelines or to swiftly transition to remote learning that is productive and fruitful and enriching enough for kids, especially school systems in low-income areas. And by the way, we need to break the link between a community's wealth and the resources available for its public schools. But what does it say about their priorities in the Senate that now into November, with schools across the country struggling, families unable to afford the childcare that they need to cover the gaps when so much learning is remote, school systems lacking the resources and expertise to adapt to this pandemic, the Senate hasn't passed any aid for schools. Again, remember, trillions of dollars have gone to investment banks in cash and loans from the federal government since this crisis started in the spring. And the Senate hasn't passed relief for school systems. That's corruption in action, y'all. This is why we need to make a change. So what I will fight for, and thank you again for the question on Twitter, is immediate support for local governments and school districts so that we can get CDC public health guidelines implemented by school systems, so that we can equip teachers and families for remote learning so it's as productive as possible, and also emergency childcare credits for working families so that they can afford the childcare they need when they can't send their kids to school because schools are partially closed. And everybody, this is about possibly to get significantly worse because the pandemic is accelerating. Again, Donald Trump and David Perdue, they just trying to wave their hands around and distract us from this. We're on the cusp of this crisis deepening and worsening. Cases and hospitalizations are increasing, deaths are increasing. And that's going to have a huge impact on our ability to get back to some kind of normalcy with education. Why isn't the Senate working on this right now? And again, there's no explanation except that they don't care about us. And that's why we need to make a change. All right, we have a question from Robert on Twitter who asks, what would you do, Jon, to fight climate change and protect the environment? And thank you, Robert, for the question. So I was speaking a moment ago about the need for a historic infrastructure plan to help get the economy moving again and to create jobs and to lay the foundations for economic recovery. And that infrastructure plan needs to include historic investment in clean energy. The bottom line is that we have to transition to clean and renewable energy in order to avoid doing devastating damage to our habitat, this planet. The scientific consensus on climate change is overwhelming. And it's not just scientists and professors in academia, it's also the military, the intelligence community, our meteorological agencies, our space agencies. There is no doubt that uncontrolled greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere will drive catastrophic climate change with a devastating impact on human health, our economy, our agriculture, and our national security. So given that there is no doubt about that, why is it that folks like Senator David Perdue won't even acknowledge the scientific consensus? I pressed him on this in our first debate, and he dodged and dodged and dodged. He won't even accept this scientific consensus. Why? It's corruption. It's the power of the oil and gas industry in Washington. If you're in Georgia, all those attack ads you've been seeing against me full of nonsense, you can rest assured that fossil fuel industry interests are funding a lot of that because they want to keep David Perdue in power because he obstructs action on the environment. And taking a step back, y'all, I mean, we've talked about the link between political corruption and the cost of healthcare, political corruption and the efforts to repeal protections for pre-existing conditions, political corruption and the price of prescriptions. Now talking about political corruption and the environment. And I'm just going to switch cameras here for a second, guys. All right, we're back. Political corruption and our environment. This is why we need campaign finance reform. This is why we have to overturn the Citizens United decision. This is why we need to ban corporate PACs. This is why we need to prevent former members of Congress from becoming lobbyists. This is why federal lobbyists shouldn't be able to make political contributions or go into service in senior positions in the federal government. I mean, right now, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, is run by a former lobbyist for Raytheon, a defense contractor. The Environmental Protection Agency is run by a former lobbyist for big coal, and on and on and on. The reason that David Perdue refuses to acknowledge climate science, refuses to take action to save our environment, is that the fossil fuel industry pays him off and buys his support. It's as simple as that. What we need to do is invest in clean and renewable energy. And this is a huge economic opportunity for Georgia. We can create tens of thousands of jobs across this state with a historic infrastructure and clean energy program. We can make Georgia the regional leader in the production of solar energy. We can train thousands and thousands of workers in technical skills to do dignified work that pays a living wage with benefits, investing in our future. And there is bipartisan support among the people for this. Georgians of all political persuasions support significant investment in infrastructure and renewable energy. We also need to re-enter the Paris Climate Accord and establish US diplomatic leadership toward a stronger climate treaty that will hold China and India to binding standards for emissions reductions. We cannot allow China and India to free ride. And we need to undo the Trump administration's rollbacks of emission standards, clean air and clean water standards, and fuel efficiency standards. So thank you so much for the question. We now have a question from Sharon Strandberg coming in live on Facebook. Hey, before we get to Sharon's question, just real quick, y'all, again, Tuesday is election day. And in case you're just joining, the reason that we're holding this town hall, the 33rd town hall of this campaign, instead of debating David Perdue right now, is that Senator Perdue pulled out of our debate at the last minute because he didn't enjoy being asked tough questions when we debated in Savannah on Wednesday. So what we're doing instead is going straight to the people of this state with a town hall meeting to answer your questions live. And as your senator, I'll do this regularly. Again, David Perdue, and look, I hope that there are some undecided voters, some Republican-leaning voters out there who are tuned in, because this is so important. This is not about political party. It's about accountability. David Perdue owes it to the people to answer questions in public. Every public servant has an obligation to be transparent and accountable. Why is David Perdue so afraid of tough questions and criticism and scrutiny? And if he is, why is he running for reelection? If Senator Perdue doesn't want to be asked tough questions, doesn't want to explain himself in public, doesn't want to tell the people about his vision for Georgia, doesn't want to answer questions about financial misconduct, about his votes on healthcare, about his record on the pandemic, he doesn't have to answer those questions. He just shouldn't run for reelection. But if he wants to keep serving us for another 6 years, the bare minimum that he owes us is to come out in public and answer for himself and debate his opponent. But he pulled out of a debate, so here we are answering questions directly from the people. Tuesday is election day. Georgia has 2 Senate races this year. We're the only state in the country with 2 Senate races. Get out there on Tuesday, vote for Reverend Warnock, vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Vote to make a change in this country, y'all. We cannot continue with 4 or 6 more years of what we're getting right now. A pandemic that is spiraling out of control, politicians who continue to lie to us and mislead us about threats to our health, who are working to rip healthcare away from us in the middle of a public health emergency. No more. It's unacceptable. But the only way we make a change is by voting. I'm going to ask my staff in a moment to throw up on screen for Georgia voters how they can get information about where to vote on Tuesday. electjon.com/vote. You can find your polling place. Send that link to all your friends. If you got a friend or a cousin who is kind of on the fence about voting, stay on and make the case. Persuade. This has to be a bottom-up, grassroots, movement-style turnout effort, unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of our state. These races are going to be so close. So I want to return to questions. Again, if you have one, just throw it in the comments or the replies. We'll try to get to as many as possible. This is a live event. I want to hear from you. Our question from Sharon: how can we unite as a country after the election? It's a great question, Sharon. And I think that it's worth remembering when we talk about unity and how we can heal our country, that is what the people want. That most Americans are not eating, breathing, living, sleeping partisan politics, or watching partisan cable news, or scrolling through political media on Twitter. Most people are just trying to go about their daily lives, follow the law, save and invest in their family's future, put away the resources they need for a dignified retirement, and give back to the community. And we need to recapture that spirit of unity. We have to heal this country after 4 years of division. We're led right now by a president whose entire playbook is division. He wants to turn us against one another so that we cannot unite to oppose his corruption and incompetence, which is getting people killed. And we need to rediscover that spirit of unity that has powered American greatness at moments of crisis in our history. At our best, Americans come together to meet the moment. And we need leaders who appeal to that spirit, not to division, not to fear. And we also need to focus on policy priorities that bring us together. Every family in Georgia will benefit when we expand access to healthcare, invest in building new health clinics, sustain our rural hospitals, expand Medicaid, crack down on this outrageous price gouging by prescription drug companies. Every family in this state will benefit, regardless of race, regardless of political party, whether urban, suburban, or rural. Every family in this state will benefit when we empower medical experts to lead the health response to this pandemic, so that we can contain this virus and return to normalcy and get back to our lives. Every family in this state will benefit when we invest in infrastructure and clean energy to create jobs and lay the foundations for decades of prosperity and sustainability. We can unite people behind that agenda. And I'm running against a guy who would rather belittle his political adversaries for their heritage. I mean, remember that Senator David Perdue, it's not just that he has refused to debate me tonight on the eve of the election because he doesn't want to answer tough questions about healthcare or his corruption or the pandemic. This is the same guy who, at a Trump rally just several weeks ago, took the podium with an opportunity to address the entire state and the entire country, and to use his power and prestige and platform as a United States Senator for good, to inspire us, to unite us, to inform us about how we can protect our family's health at this moment, to advance some vision that improves our lives. That is what Senator Perdue had the opportunity to do when he took the podium at that Trump rally. Instead, he went on a 15-minute rant and then mocked Senator Kamala Harris for her heritage. That's Senator Perdue's idea of leadership. Avoid substance, deflect from the pressing issue of the day, a nearly unprecedented health crisis. Don't address how many of his own constituents are suffering. Small business owners, workers on the brink of bankruptcy or foreclosure or eviction. David Perdue didn't address any of that. What David Perdue did was mock Kamala Harris because she has an Indian American name. We deserve so much better than this, y'all. And we can unite this country by electing people who will bring a spirit of healing and unity to public service. So thank you for the question, Sharon. And we're going to close out with this question. Rennie from Johns Creek asks, is there anything that Rennie can do now through Tuesday to assist the campaign in ensuring we do all we can to push you over the finish line? Thank you for the question, Rennie. I appreciate it. And the answer is yes, yes, yes. We need your help. We have to sprint through the tape, y'all. Take nothing for granted. If you're out there watching and you've been feeling some anxiety about the state of the world and the state of the country, it's totally understandable in a crisis like this, and with the political leadership or lack of leadership that we currently have. Just take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and focus with me now. Because there are hours left before the polls close when we can do work that will influence the future of our republic. We have agency, we have power as citizens, and time left on the clock to determine what happens in this election. We're at a fork in the road for our country, and I would argue for the entire world. We can continue down this path of corruption, deception, authoritarianism, racism, or we can reunite this country, dig out from the rubble of what's been destroyed, empower medical experts to control this virus, rush economic and financial relief to suffering workers and small businesses, pass a historic infrastructure and clean energy plan to recover economically, to invest in prosperity and sustainability, expand Medicaid and build new health clinics to solve our health crisis here in Georgia, crack down on price gouging by drug and insurance companies so everybody can afford health care, clean up our corrupt campaign finance system by getting dark money and corporate money out of politics. Let's do those things. The only way we get to do those things is by giving it our all over the next 72 hours. So I'm going to ask my team to put the website where you can sign up to volunteer up on the screen. But whether or not you sign up on our website, use all the tools at your disposal, your social network, your church network, your business network, your family. Persuade people to get out there and vote. Here in Georgia, y'all, it could come down to literally just a few hundred votes. Every vote counts. Vote, vote, vote. And if you're in Georgia, you can text VOTE to 51015. I'm going to ask my team to put that up on screen as well. Text VOTE to 51015. Get your polling place, find the voter protection hotline, make a plan to vote on Tuesday, y'all. Text every person you know to vote. Thank you so much for joining for this town hall. Again, our 33rd of the campaign. Thank you for submitting questions online. I humbly ask the people of this state for the honor of representing you in the U.S. Senate. And on day one of serving you in the Senate, we'll hold another town hall just like this, discuss the legislative agenda, discuss how we're going to achieve the vision that I've laid out here. And thank you all for tuning in. Love to you and your family.